Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise, give you the essential insights you need in, well, what feels like a constantly changing world. I mean, the global security landscape, it seems to shift almost daily, doesn't it? Keeping up can feel, frankly, overwhelming. But that's why we're here. Today, we're doing a crucial deep dive into some really significant sources. We've got the Defense Intelligence Agency's 2025 Worldwide Threat Assessment that just came out May 11th, 2025. And we're pairing that with a close look at the recent, very dramatic U.S. and Israeli military actions targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. So our mission to really distill what's most vital here, help you understand not just what's happening, but why it matters for, your grasp of global security. Okay, let's dig in. Let's start with that big picture view, the global security environment. The DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, their 2025 assessment, it paints a pretty stark picture. They're saying the threat landscape isn't just changing fast, it's getting way more complex. Both current dangers and, well, some unsettling future trends. It's dynamic, requires constant attention.
That's absolutely right. The DIA report, it really hammers home several big themes that are, reshaping international relations, even conflict itself.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that really jumps out is how advanced technology is seen as a major threat multiplier.
Threat multiplier, okay.
Yeah.
Huh?
We're talking artificial intelligence, biotech, quantum sciences, microelectronics, space, cyber, unmanned systems, the whole gamut. These aren't just like future concepts. They are right now transforming how conflicts are fought, creating totally new ways for adversaries to threaten U.S. interests and global stability.
And it's not just tech in isolation, right? There's this cooperation aspect, too.
Exactly. That's another huge theme. This deepening cooperation between adversaries, U.S. competitors, adversaries, they're actively boosting their military, diplomatic, economic support for each other. Why? Well, specifically to try and get around U.S. power, undermine it.
We've seen concrete examples of that, haven't we?
Oh, definitely. I mean, look at North Korea, shipping millions of artillery rounds, dozens of ballistic missiles to Russia for the war in Ukraine. That's documented. And then Iran, providing Russia with armed UAVs, drones, also used against Ukraine.
And goes the other way, too.
It does. Russia, in return, is sharing more of its critical space, nuclear, and missile technology, its expertise, materials, sharing with China, Iran, North Korea. The report estimates this helps them make significant jumps in their WMD programs, weapons of mass destruction, probably over the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Wow. So that really changes the strategic calculus, doesn't it? Capabilities spreading faster.
It fundamentally shifts things.
Yeah.
Traditional deterrence might not work the same way against adversaries who suddenly have capabilities that used to belong only to major powers. It potentially, speeds up timelines for future conflict.
And we need to stress, this isn't just abstract geopolitics. These shifts, this adversary cooperation, it hits home right here in the U.S. The DIA report talks about a dynamic and diffuse terrorist threat. ISIS, they say, is likely trying for high-profile attacks in the West. They single out ISIS affiliates in Afghanistan and al-Qaeda in Yemen as the biggest direct threats, and we saw that awful attack January 1st, 2025. ISIS-inspired lone actor New Orleans, 14 people killed.
A terrible reminder.
And then there was that arrest, spring 2024, 8 people with potential ISIS ties caught entering through the southern border. That really highlights the security vulnerabilities there.
It does. And speaking of the southern border, that ties into another major point. Transnational criminal organizations. They're aggressively exploiting the situation, the migration flows, groups like the Gulf Cartel, Cartel Jalisco New Generation, MS-13. The list goes on. They've built up huge drug trafficking networks, influence right here inside the U.S.
Posing a massive, maybe sometimes overlooked threat to our own security.
Absolutely. And the human cost is staggering. Look at fentanyl. Over 86,000 Americans killed by it in 2024 alone.
86,000. That's devastating.
It is. And what's worrying is that fentanyl seizures at the southwest border actually decreased by 30% in the first half of fiscal year 2025.
Decreased. So potentially more getting through.
That's the concern. It really makes you think about the challenges in stopping it. Yeah, and the real human tragedy behind these numbers.
And beyond the physical threats, the drugs, the potential terrorists, there's the intelligence threat too, amplified by tech.
Right. Advanced tech helps foreign intelligence services target U.S. personnel, U.S. activities in new, sophisticated ways. Ubiquitous technical surveillance, for one, but also non-traditional collection, people posing as academics, as tourists, gathering intelligence.
It's a constant battle on that front.
Constantly evolving. Needs constant adaptation and counterintelligence.
Okay, so that's the broad landscape. Let's zoom in now on a specific persistent flashpoint. Iran.
always a major focus of U.S. policy and obviously central to recent events. Nuclear ambitions, regional proxies, a consistent source of instability.
Absolutely. Iran is critical.
Yeah.
And you have to understand, its nuclear program has deep roots. Ironically, they signed the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, way back in '68.
And the U.S. actually helped them initially, right?
Yeah.
In the 50s.
Helped develop their civilian program then. But fast forward to now, things are obviously very different. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, just censured Iran on June 12, 2025, for basically not playing by the rules.
And their enrichment levels have been climbing.
Sharply. By May 31st, 2025, their stockpile of 60% enriched uranium hit over 408 kilograms.
And 60% is pretty close to weapons grade.
It's just a technical step away. Yeah. That amount, 408 kilos, is theoretically enough for multiple nuclear weapons if they decide to enrich it further.
Multiple, wow.
And add to that their work on Space Launch Vehicle Boosters, SLVs.
Oh,
These are powerful rockets for satellites, but...
BB adapted for missiles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The tech could shorten their path to an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, if they converted it.
Yeah.
So the capability is accelerating, which is a very serious threat.
And beyond the direct nuclear threat, there's their regional strategy, this axis of resistance.
Right. Backing groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, that's their main way to project power, push back against U.S. influence. Though, it's worth noting, these groups aren't just puppets. They have their own agendas, varying degrees of autonomy from Tehran.
But that axis has taken some hits recently.
Significant hits, yes.
Hmm?
Israel's actions severely degraded Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. And maybe even bigger, the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria back in December 2024, that forced a complete withdrawal of Iranian personnel from Syria.
Which disrupts their supply lines.
Hugely. It directly messed up Iran's ability to rebuild Hezbollah's strategic weapons stockpiles, made resupply much harder.
So, setbacks for the Axis, definitely. But the threats haven't vanished. The Houthis, for example.
Still very active. Nearly 200 maritime attacks since October 2023. Hit over 30 merchant ships. Caused Red Sea traffic to plummet by 70%.
A massive disruption to global trade.
Huge.
Yeah.
And they started strikes again in March 2025 after a pause.
And Iran itself has hit Israel directly.
Twice. April 2024, about 300 missiles and UAVs. October 2024, around 200 missiles. Though reports suggest Israel's counterstrikes in October might have set back Iran's ballistic missile production by maybe up to a year.
A temporary setback, perhaps?
Likely. And beyond that direct military stuff, Iran keeps plotting assassinations, targeting former and current U.S. officials' retaliation for Soleimani's death in 2020.
Still pursuing that.
Yes, and targeting Israeli and Jewish interests globally. Plus, their proxies in Iraq haven't stopped. Over 200 attacks on U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq, Syria, Jordan since October 2023. It's a very aggressive posture still.
Which brings us to the recent dramatic military response. Operation Midnight Hammer. A huge show of force, clearly triggered by Iran's actions and nuclear progress. But here's a key point. That initial intelligence report suggesting the strikes only set back Iran's program by a few months. What does that tell us about the difficulty of stopping a nuclear program with just military force?
It's a really crucial question, isn't it? Operation Midnight Hammer followed right after that IAEA censure on June 12th. Israel struck on the 13th, then the U.S. action on June 21st. The scale was immense. B-2 stealth bombers flying from the continental U.S., multiple refuelings needed, submarines launching 30 Tomahawks.
Over 100 U.S. aircraft involved.
Over 100. And remarkably, 0 losses and 0 casualties for U.S. forces. Operationally, that's extraordinary.
Targeting Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan, key nuclear sites?
Right. Isfahan had already been hit by Israel multiple times. President Trump's statement on June 22nd was blunt. Aim was to completely and totally obliterate key enrichment facilities, compel Iran to make peace.
He hinted at regime change, but officials walked that back.
Yeah, he hinted, but others clarified that wasn't the official objective. But then you have that intelligence report, PBS, New York Times reporting it, saying maybe only a few months setback.
Which really complicates things. How do you measure success?
It's incredibly hard. Iran's not likely to grant full inspections, especially after finding hidden sites in the past. Plus, you always worry about material hidden deep underground, in tunnels. Complete elimination is, well, challenging.
And there was the risk of radioactive fallout, right? That limited the targets.
Absolutely. That risk heavily influenced target selection, like the operational Bushehr nuclear power plant, reportedly avoided because a hit there could be catastrophic, releasing widespread radiation.
So Midnight Hammer pushed the limits of conventional strikes. trying to be precise but avoid environmental disaster.
Exactly, it tested those limits,
Mhm.
especially since we don't know exactly where all of Iran's highly enriched uranium actually is. It's this tightrope walk. Achieve the military goal, but don't cause an even bigger disaster. Shows the immense complexity.
And the reactions globally, predictably all over the map.
Very mixed, very complex. Here in the U.S., you saw strong support from Republicans. Lindsey Graham, Mike Johnson, Tom Cotton, Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, praising it as a show of strength, a clear line against a nuclear Iran.
But not universal support, even on the right.
No. Some within President Trump's own base, like Representatives Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they voiced real concerns. Worries about escalation, unintended consequences.
And Iran's reaction.
Their parliament voted to close the Strait of Hormuz. Hugely important shipping lane, 20% of world oil, and LNG goes through there.
But they didn't actually close it immediately?
Not immediately ratified or implemented, no. But they did retaliate with missile strikes on U.S. bases in Qatar and Iraq, showing they can hit back.
And internationally.
A real spectrum. Concern about escalation from the UN, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Finland, Spain, Uruguay. Outright condemnation from Algeria, Bolivia, Brazil, North Korea, Pakistan. But then support, or at least acknowledgement of necessity, from others. Israel, obviously, Albania, Australia, Czech Republic, Estonia, Latvia, Paraguay, Romania, Ukraine. They often saw it as needed to stop Iran getting the bomb.
And Russia's reaction?
Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chair of their Security Council, made a pretty provocative statement. Said countries would now arm Iran with nuclear warheads, upping the ante rhetorically.
So what are China and Russia thinking through all this? It must be complicated for them.
Oh, absolutely. They're likely wrestling with mixed feelings. On one hand, probably amazed, maybe a bit nervous, seeing the U.S. military's operational reach and precision. That's got to register. But on the other hand, maybe they're wondering, okay, is the U.S. now going to get pulled deeper into the Middle East again? Will that divert attention, resources away from us?
It's strategic calculation for them, for sure. It really underscores how interconnected everything is. An incredibly insightful look at these evolving threats and the complex dynamics. When you pull it all together, what these sources show is just that deep interconnectedness, the fast-changing threats, adversaries working together more closely, the immediate shockwaves from military action. It all creates this incredibly dynamic, challenging environment for U.S. security.
Exactly. And you see how terrorist groups feed off conflict, how criminal organizations exploit global issues like migration. It's all linked. Which brings us back to that fundamental debate, doesn't it? Military force. It can be incredibly precise, operationally successful, as we saw, but does it achieve the long-term strategic goal?
Or does it risk just motivating adversaries more, dragging out the conflict?
Compared to, say, patient diplomacy that might actually allow for real inspections, real strategic shaping. It's the ongoing question, the constant tension in foreign policy and national security. How do you use the tools you have most effectively?
So we've covered a lot. The DIA's view of diverse global threats, Iran's nuclear program and its proxies, the strikes, the global reactions, a stark reminder of a world in constant flux. It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What does this interplay, the advanced tech, the adversary cooperation, the impact of military force? What does it tell us about the future of global security? And how might these shifts force us to rethink our traditional approaches, both defense and diplomacy, in the years ahead? Something to consider. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.